Well, hey everyone, welcome back with us. So glad you're here today. We are deep into our teaching series, Broken Signposts, Becoming a People Who Point to God. And as we get into it today, I want to invite you to think about a situation in your life, something you're facing right now that is hard and painful. It might be unjust and unfair. You so wish it were different, but it's not. It is the way it is right now. And what is not the way it's supposed to be. You know, I have a book on my shelf, Not the Way It's Supposed to Be, by Cornelius Plantinga. It's a great book. It's about sin and its effects in our world. We all have some idea that this world is not the way it's supposed to be. In fact, I've got a friend who uses that line in prayers. I've heard him use it more than once. God, this is not the way it's supposed to be. He might be praying about some big societal issue or just about the pain and struggle of his ailing wife. And we all feel this deeply. It is the profound problem, philosophically speaking, of the entire human race. We call it the problem of evil, the problem of pain and suffering. How is it possible that an all-powerful, all-loving God could exist and this ugly, painful, unjust world exists? How do those two fit together? And if there is the God, why is the world not fixed and made right? It's a big issue. It keeps some people from the faith. For others, once they begin to experience profound suffering, it drives them from the faith, causes them to deconstruct what they had always believed. And it's a real issue. It kept C.S. Lewis being an atheist for decades. It was all about the problem of evil and pain. The universe just seemed so unjust, and Lewis couldn't wrap his head around it, not if there's supposedly a God there. But then he started to think about it more. And later he says, my argument against God was the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? Lewis realized that he had some transcendent standard in him, that if the universe is just a random collection of atoms, should not exist, but it does. Where do you get this idea? Peter Kraft, great Christian philosopher, agrees and says, if you're going to critique what's going on here and now, well, he says, to have a quarrel with here, to criticize here, you need to know there as a standard. You've got to have some innate understanding of the way it's supposed to be to recognize when it's not, which points us not just to justice as a transcendent value, but points us to God. Justice points to God. And we all have a judicial sentiment in our hearts. We want things to be right and fair, and when they're not, we're frustrated. Well, I think today we're going to see that God feels the same way. Because God doesn't just believe in justice, He is justice. It's an attribute of His. Jesus embodies it perfectly. And we're going to see a great example of it in John chapter 9. Now, John 9, the entire chapter, all 41 verses are part of one singular story. It's one of the longer stories you'll actually read in the Bible, at least in the Gospels. But I'm only going to read the first 12 verses. It goes like this. As Jesus went along, He saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked Him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned, or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of Him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. After saying this, He spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and anointed the man's eyes. And He said, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, I don't know might seem like a weird place to end the reading, but it's the perfect place to begin the sermon. Because when it comes to pain and suffering, there's just so much perplexity. There's so much that just causes us to say, "I don't know." You know, the question we always want to ask is why? Why is this happening to me? Why is God allowing this? Answer, I don't know. In this man's case, it wasn't because of any particular sin. Yes, pain and suffering came into the world through sin, generally speaking, but Jesus says it's not because of a particular sin that this man is suffering. Likewise, the Bible teaches us it's not because of particular virtue in us that might cause us to be blessed. Blessing and suffering come, it would seem, irrespective of our particular behaviors at any given time. Why is God giving us pain and pleasure in current proportion? I don't know. Why won't He change maybe just this one thing that you would love for Him to change? It's like, God, I'm not asking for 100 miracles, just one. And why so often do you not get your miracle? I don't know. It is shrouded in mystery. Now, just because we don't know or we can't understand the purpose or the meaning doesn't mean that there's not one. Why your prayer isn't answered the way you want, we don't know, but it doesn't mean your prayer's not being answered. I love what my friend Kevin says about prayers. He says, whenever you pray to God, like as a true child of God, you're going to get one of three answers. You're going to get yes, you're going to get not yet, or you're going to get, I have something better. Which is a great way to put it, I think. It's not that God says no to a lot of things. He just says, oh, I have something better. And people of faith believe that the better that's out there yet for us to enjoy is so great that it is in many ways going to reverse or justify all the pains we're going through currently. Dostoevsky, in his great Brothers Karamazov, in one passage writes this, I believe, like a child, that suffering will be healed and made up for, that all the humiliating absurdity of human contradictions will vanish like a pitiful mirage, that in the world's finale, something so precious will come to pass, that it will suffice for all hearts, for the comforting of all resentments, for the atonement of all the crimes of humanity, that it will make it not only possible to forgive, but to justify all that has happened. That's what people of faith believe. You might have a hard time believing it. You might be saying, I don't know. Well, let's see if we can't work our way a little bit toward this faith and this confidence. Because we do believe that there is a hopeful and just future out in front of us. And if we're frustrated now, we can understand that. But, as one person said, it's like reading a novel. And every chapter you're being frustrated because the story's not over yet. And hey, Brothers K is a really long novel. Maybe you've read it in exactly that same way back in the day. But hey, God is writing a story here, and it's not over yet. But it does leave us perplexed and frustrated in the here and now. So many things we don't know. And it's interesting, as you go through John chapter 9, not knowing is just all over the place. I mean, initially they ask the guy, so where's this Jesus? He says, I don't know. Then they ask, well, how were you healed? He says, he put some mud on my eyes and told me to wash. Other than that, I don't know. A debate breaks out because the Pharisees are on the scene and the Pharisees are going to do what they do, and that is criticize Jesus because he did this miracle on the Sabbath. And some are saying, well, whatever, we know he did this on the Sabbath. That makes him a Sabbath breaker, so he's a bad man. Other people are saying, he's a miracle worker. How could he not be a good man? And they're divided. They just don't know. They bring in his parents, the man's parents. Hey, is this your son? How did he get healed? And they're like, hey, he's our son. How he got healed, we don't know. So they bring the man back in to interview him again. And they're like, hey, you give glory to God for this miracle? Because this Jesus, we know that he's a sinner. And the man says, well, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I once was blind, but now I see. This so infuriates the religious authorities that they excommunicate him. They cast him out of the synagogue community. But Jesus goes and finds him. He finds the man, and it's actually to this man and other hearers around him that Jesus is going to say one definitive statement that really sums up the whole. John 9:39, Jesus says, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind may see, and those who see may become blind." Jesus says, that's why I'm here, for judgment. Which might sound a little harsh and scary, might sound like it doesn't accord with the Jesus that is gentle and lowly that we so love, but it's part and parcel of who he is and what he has come to do. He's come for judgment. Now, judgment, that's a legal word. It just means to render a decision. And Jesus is coming to render decisions for all the oppressed, all who have suffered injustice. And you know, when you first get that decision from a judge, that's just the beginning of justice, right? I mean, if you typically go to a judge because you're looking for justice, because something is not the way it's supposed to be, and you want the judge to put it right. And if you get a favorable ruling, if you get a just ruling, well, that's just the first step toward true justice, full justice. The decision's just the start. Now, there might be a sentence to be served by someone. There might be damages to pay. There might be restitution to make. All of that is what justice is about. It begins with a decision. But then, when things are made the way they were supposed to be, that's justice. Putting things right. That's what justice is. And Jesus says, I came to make things the way they're supposed to be. This is why I came into this world, Jesus says. And just the fact that he uses this world, that's significant. He's saying, this world, not just the world, this broken, rundown, messed up, out of whack world. I came to put this world right. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about justice and justification, how this happens. I'm going to use some big words here, but the concepts are really simple. I just got 3 things about justice that I want us to see in this text. First, justice is both restorative and retributive. It's restorative and retributive. And both of these aspects of justice, the happy restorative side, the sobering retributive side, they're both works of God's grace. But it starts with the restorative side. And I just love the fact that Jesus, as he went along, he sees this man. This man's not crying out like blind Bartimaeus, Lord, have mercy on me. He's just sitting there and Jesus sees him and he notices him. We love this about the Lord. It's the beginning of him making things right. He just sees us in our plight. I mean, for how many other people was this guy completely overlooked. He just became part of the scenery in which they were actors living their lives. You know, this guy was kind of like a blemish on a wall or a nick on your furniture. You've been living with it for decades, you don't even see it anymore. That's who this guy was. But Jesus sees him. And it would seem that without even being asked, he heals him. And he heals him in the most remarkable way. Let's talk about the spit and the mud. He spits into the dirt, makes a little bit of mud, and rubs it on the man's eyes. Why in the world would Jesus do that way? Well, we don't know for sure, but there are a couple of plausible and I think compelling reasons. One is he's doing an act of new creation. In one little way, Jesus is beginning to make the whole world the way it's supposed to be. Remember when God first made humans in his image? It says that God formed a body for Adam out of the dust of the ground. God got his hands dirty to make human beings. Now, we caused creation to be plunged into ruin and ill effects. I mean, eyes were created to see, but this man's don't. So Jesus begins new creation, making some mud to make new eyes for this man. In fact, later on in the conversation about this, this man testifies, never since the world began has anyone ever heard of someone opening blind eyes of a person who was born blind. Never since creation of the world. But now it's happening because new creation has come. But then there's a second possibility here, and maybe they're both true. In the ancient world, like in ours, bodily fluids are considered really gross and contaminating and defiling, except on occasion when a God-approved holy man might use his saliva or his blood to heal another. And Jesus may well do this miracle in this particular way as a sign for all those who are there about his true identity. He's a God-approved holy man because his saliva doesn't contaminate, it heals. And that may well be why this is such a long story and why there's a long inquiry here. It's not just that Jesus did this on the Sabbath. It's not just the when. It's the how. They keep asking, how did he do this? Because if he did this miracle in this particular way with saliva from his mouth, it says something about his approval before God. And that's something the Pharisees simply cannot countenance. In fact, when this man insists that Jesus is a good man, because how else could he open his eyes? They're so furious, they excommunicate him. They cast him out of the synagogue. And that's when Jesus comes and finds him. Jesus comes and seeks this man out. Now, he's never seen Jesus before, right? Because he was still blind when he got the mud. Jesus sent him away to the pool of Siloam. It was only after he washed there that he could see. Jesus wasn't there at that point. So Jesus comes and finds him. And in verse 35 to 38, there's this cheeky little exchange. It's beautiful. Jesus comes up to him and he says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the guy says, "Who is he, sir? Tell me so I may believe in him." Jesus said, "Well, you've now seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you. It's me right here." And the man says, "I do believe." And he falls to the ground and he worships Jesus. And now he doesn't just have physical sight. He has spiritual light. He has the light of life. John 8:12, "Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Now this guy can see physically and spiritually. And interestingly, it's right after this, it's part of this same exchange where Jesus says to this man and anyone else who's still around, "For judgment I've come into this world, so that the blind may see and those who see may become blind," which speaks of his retributive justice. those who claim to have insight, those who claim to be wise, those who claim to know, and who claim to be right with God by their mere adherence to Jewish law. Jesus says, all those people who say they see, I'm going to show just how blind they really are. It's for judgment that I've come into the world to confirm these things. Who are the blind, poor in spirit, needy souls who are receptive to the Messiah's work? And who are those who could really care less? Now, Jesus is not, meting out the sentence yet. He's not condemning yet, but his mere presence is forcing a judgment. Whose side are you on? Who do you need? Do you need God's Messiah? Or are you really quite content with your life the way it is? Jesus says, it's for judgment that I've come into the world. And one day, the judgment will be meted out to such an extent that the oppressors will be removed and will never be allowed to oppress again. The judgers will be removed. They'll never be able to judge you or shame you or guilt you again. This is part of the gospel. Hey, the oppressed are only safe and free when they know their oppressors can never touch them or harm them again. And Jesus says, I'm doing this. It's part of why I came. I'm going to make it right, Jesus says. But until then, here's the second aspect of justice. Justice is imperative and participative. Imperative and participative. Now, what do I mean by that? Simply that justice must be done and that we get to participate in doing it. Jesus says to his disciples, it's an interesting little turn of phrase. He says, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. He's involving the disciples in his work, in his ministry. We must do the work for which God the Father sent me. And even in healing this man, he sends him to the pool of Siloam, and Siloam itself means sent. In some ways, it's meaning like, hey, you trust in, believe in, wash yourself in the sent one, Jesus could be saying. But also, hey, once you're a recipient of grace, once God's begun to justify you, put you in right relationship with God the Father, that's first and foremost, but even set other things right in your life. Once you've been sent that way, or you've received the sent one that way, you are yourself sent. Like Jesus will say at the end of the Gospel of John, as the Father sent me, so I am sending you. I've brought justice to you. I want you to bring it to others. I'm working it in you and for you. You work it on behalf of others. Micah 6:8, one of the great verses of the Old Testament. He's shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to act justly, to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Every saved person is a sent person, and justice is part and parcel of our mission. Friends, I think Christians and churches need to come to grips with this more and more. Somehow we've ceded the word justice to the world, and often to those that we would look at and say, they are too far left on the political spectrum. It's the radical progressives who are always caring about justice. It should not be so. Justice is a biblical word. It's a God word. And it has a lot more to do with things than just criminal justice or making sure that everybody gets their just desserts. Real biblical justice is restorative. It's putting things back the way they were supposed to be. It's restoring people to a right relationship with God. And it's fixing their bodies and working on social structures and making institutions better and healthier and all the rest. It's all part of justice work and justice ministry. And by the way, our refusal to receive this imperative or to participate with God in this work, this is one of the big reasons why the problem of evil and suffering continues to be a problem for so many people. It's because we're not participating with God and doing His work. Did you know that our planet produces enough food every day that we could feed every person 10,000 calories if we wanted to? So why is it that so many people are starving and without food? We might be saying, God, do something about this, but God is looking at us as those who've been given dominion over the planet and saying, why don't you do something about that? Tens of thousands of children die every year from preventable disease. We shake our fists at heaven and say, God, why don't you do something? He says, why don't you do something? Billions of people live on less money a day than many of us spend on our morning cup of coffee. Friends, that's on us. There's more slavery in our world today than during all of the transatlantic slave trade. That's us. That's our evil run amok. And drugs and pornography and all the rest that ravage lives. The problem of evil is us, which is partly why God hasn't fixed it all yet. Remember in 2 Peter, where people are saying, where's this promise of the second coming? Everything seems to continue just as it always has, this messed up world that's not the way it's supposed to be. And what's the answer? God's not slow in fulfilling His promise, but He's patient. Not wanting to condemn or judge anyone, but to see all come to faith in Him. If God's going to eradicate the evil, He's going to have to eradicate too many of us. Which brings us to a third and final point about justice here, and that is, justice is progressive and prospective. It's progressive and prospective. Now, I don't want anybody to get tweaked because I use the word progressive. I don't mean that in a political sense, that somehow justice just belongs to the left wing of the political spectrum. I just mean justice is progressive in that it grows and develops and advances over time, over lots of time. Like Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And that's a longer arc than most any of us would ever want it to be. But justice is, by its nature in this world, it's progressive. And I'm saying it's perspective in saying that it's future. It's a hope that we believe is real and is coming. The prospects of justice are bound up ultimately in Jesus and His second coming. Our calling now in this fallen world is to work for justice. We are to do justly as we love being merciful and restorative to people, as we walk humbly with our God. And we're going to do this, and we want to see things advance and progress. But hey, we are not post-millennial when it comes to our eschatology, our understanding of last things. It's not like, hey, you know what? We're going to make this world more and more good, more and more just. We're going to push this ball all the way down the field to where all we need is like Jesus to come and push us into the end zone, and then we're there. No, it's going to be like for us 3 yards and a cloud of dust with light years to go until we score. And it's ultimately Jesus who's going to come and take our, meager progress and massively, quantumly take it forward into a new heaven and a new earth. So there's kind of a dynamic tension here. It's progressive. We believe in change. We believe in development. But we also know there's no way it's really going to happen until the Lord comes back. We need Him. We need Him so badly. Our hearts cry, Maranatha, come, Lord Jesus. Maybe this pain, let's go back to the beginning. The pain, the suffering, the unfairness and injustice you are dealing with right now? That is so hard. Makes you maybe sometimes feel like you're losing your grip on God. You start to wonder, like, what's the point? We have to know that Jesus is coming. He's coming for us. Just as surely as he came and found this man who was cast out of the synagogue. I mean, do you notice, by the way, this guy just exchanged one problem for a whole new set of problems? That's life in Christ in this world. Before, he couldn't see. And even though he was often overlooked, at least he was more or less welcome to be there. But now he can see, and he simply credits Jesus with this miracle. And his neighbors are skeptical. His parents step back like, he's our son, how he got healed, we don't know. The religious authorities, they cast him out. Now he's on the outs with the whole Jewish community in his town. I mean, it's bad. He can see everyone hating him. And yet now he has to endure this. And maybe he was asking, like, why? I don't know. But one thing's different. He has Jesus on his side. Jesus came and found the outcasts and said, you might be on the outs with these people. You're on the ins with me now. And my future is your future. And yes, it's through many hardships that we must enter the kingdom. The pain and suffering does not go away for Christians. In fact, often it intensifies. But why? But why? Let's think about this again. I'm not going to read it because I just used it in a sermon a few weeks ago. But remember that passage C.S. Lewis says about, you invite God into your life and he comes to live in you like in a house. And he starts to work on that house. At first he's getting the drains right and he's fixing the roof leaks. You knew that stuff needed to be done and you understand what he's doing. But then Lewis says, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make any sense. What is he doing to my life? What is going on here? And Lewis says, the answer is, you thought he was just going to tidy up your life a little bit, make you into a decent little cottage? But no, he's making a palace, one he intends to fully live in himself. And last week we talked about Jesus in John 14 saying, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And so he is. But also, through our trials and our hardships, it's equally true, not just that Jesus says, I'm going to prepare a place for you, but I'm going to prepare you for that place. I'm going to use all the stuff of your life to prepare you for that place. Friends, this is where Romans 8 comes in. Romans 8:28. God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. Now, what that verse does not mean is that, God just snaps his fingers, and if you just be patient for a moment, he's going to take all the bad and he's going to make it good. That is so often the pathetic, thin way we use that verse. No, what Romans 8:28 needs to do is get linked up with 29 and 30. God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. For those whom God foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that Jesus might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those that he predestined or that he foreknew, he also predestined. And those he predestined, he also called. And those he called, he also justified. And those he justified, he also glorified. The whole point is, God is conforming our lives to Christ's life. He's conforming our character to Christ's character. The Christ life is a cross-shaped life. It is full of suffering, self-abnegation, self-giving, and then the glory, and then the beauty, and then the perfection, and then the fullness of joy forever and ever. God is causing all the bad things in our lives to make our story look like Christ's story. Or 2 Corinthians 4 says, hey, we don't lose heart. Outwardly, we might be wasting away. Inwardly, we're being renewed day by day because our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Friends, this is why we can hold on a little bit longer. I've said this before, I'll just say it again by way of closing. To some degree, all our frustration with the problem of evil and suffering in our own lives, all our frustration is somewhat relative. I mean, we all have all sorts of little pains and problems that we put up with, and we don't impugn God's goodness or His justice because of them. We just take it for granted that that's part of living in this fallen world. But at some arbitrary point, we cross a pain threshold where we say, okay, now that's unfair, God. But where's the clear line of demarcation there? It's not one. It's kind of relative to our own feebleness. Some of us have a higher pain threshold, some of us have a lower pain threshold, but we recognize there's going to be some pain in this world. It's only when it hits a certain point that we somehow begin to shake our fists at heaven. Maybe we could raise our pain threshold just a little bit. Same with the time horizon, how long we have to wait for it to get fixed. If God said, hey, I know you're in excruciating pain right now, but I just want you to hang on for one more week. And a week from now, I'm going to utterly heal you. How would you live this next week knowing that hope was out there? It changed the way you live. You'd endure with great joy. Well, what if God said 2 weeks from now? Or a month from now? Or a year from now? You see, the time horizon, it's kind of just relative to how you're feeling in the moment. You could wait. If you could wait 1 week, you'd wait 2. If you could wait 2 weeks, you could wait a month. And by God's grace, if you need to wait a year, you'll wait a year. And if you need to wait a decade, you'll wait a decade. And if you need to wait until either you die or Jesus comes back, by God's grace, you will persevere in the faith. Because God is preparing a place for you, and He's preparing you for that place. In the same way that He prepared Jesus to do and be all that was intended for Him. May you believe in it. Justice is coming. God says, behold, I'm making all things new. Believe it, and God be with you.
Thanks for checking out our online teaching. If you enjoyed this content and would like some more information about us, head over to our website at www.willowdalechapel.org or download our app. There you can stay up to date on any events, ministries, and other opportunities we have coming up at Willowdale Chapel.